The Bulldogs, for the first time since 2021, are going to host a regional in Starkville. They were the number 14 national seed. Sorry, I'm getting the stuff pulled up. After some conversation about whether they would or would not host, I'll talk more on that here in just a sec. But we learned last night we're officially selected as a host. And coming to the Starkville Regional, the 2 seed, the Cincinnati Bearcats, the 3 seed, Louisiana Raging Cajuns, so a program State's got some familiarity with there in the postseason. Not of the good kind, but they got some familiarity. And then the 4 seed, the Lipscomb Bisons, who State did play in the regular season earlier this year and absolutely took it to them this coming weekend in Starkville. Some questions on Sunday about whether or not we were going to see Mississippi State's name called as a host. You kind of started to hear some rumbling Saturday night that that conversation was being had as to whether or not that was actually going to happen. More and more people in college baseball media were starting to say that they were not as sold on MSU as a lock, despite the Bulldogs having a very good overall profile from a metric standpoint, a record standpoint. The question was kind of, do they have the weight of the quality of the wins there to be a host team? And could this be a case of bucking the trend in favor of a team that's hotter, the Arkansas Razorbacks being the team that came up a lot? I was contemplating a lot how I was going to discuss this on the show had State not hosted. Because I am one of the ones who understood the case that was being made against them. And, that probably won't come as a surprise to others, considering that I did ask, was 16 and 14 actually going to be enough in SEC play, given some of the struggles against top teams, which ended up being the thing that was asked about State, at least from people covering college baseball. I was not as set on this team, like not hosting would be just an utter travesty based on the profile. I understood the argument being made. I also got where Mississippi State fans were coming from, where you're talking about a 40-win SEC team, 18 wins against SEC opponents, didn't take a single bad loss all season. They're 13 in the RPI. I think it was number 7 in the strength of schedule. That profile hosts 100% of the time. In fact, people were sharing the article from 64 Analytics talking about how much the RPI truly matters in terms of hosting, and it generally matters a lot. If you're inside the top 16, you're usually pretty safe about being a host with a few outliers. And obviously there were a couple this year. But if you're well inside the top 16, I guess State was not well inside, but they were within 3 spots at number 13. You generally are pretty good unless you got some really major red flags, which State didn't have. And everything pointed to that's a hosting profile. That's a team that deserves the host. For them to not host would mean that you are the precedent is there that team hosts, and were they not host, that would mean the committee is blatantly going against that precedent, which would be a true travesty in the minds of a lot of people. And totally get all that. And frankly, I mean, it's true. Like, State's profile was there to host. Where I understand the other side of the argument, and I kind of mentioned this a second ago, where like the case being made, did you really have enough quality wins? And let me say this first, because I know there was a lot of talk going at Kendall Rogers D1 Baseball and going at Baseball America that they're just trying to stir stuff up for clicks, and that they're trying to, get a big-time fan base of Mississippi State pissed off at them to get a bunch of reactions. I don't think that's what it was. And maybe I'm being far too generous to media. I think 90%, not even 90, 95+% of the time that fans think people in like national media, and I'm not talking about outlets that are very clearly like putting graphics out there for engagement, which there's some big brands that do that. But I think the majority of the time when fans say, you guys are just doing this to get our clicks from our fan base, make us mad, that's not what was happening. I do think D1 was looking for content, but not in the way that they're trying to get a fan base fired up. I think D1, what they were coming at it is, okay, we think these are the teams that are hosting. And I apply this to Baseball America and anyone else as well. These are the teams that we think are most likely to host. These are the profiles that make the most sense. But we do know there are instances where the committee throws a curveball at us. 2024 is a great example of that. Like Mississippi State, people thought they would host that year. They ended up not. Very similar profile ultimately to what you saw with Arkansas this year. So I guess if you're talking about a precedent being followed, there's your example. But you can also go back to 2022, which I'll be completely honest, that's not a case where I paid close attention to what happened in terms of the postseason because Mississippi State wasn't involved. And if State's not involved, I'm not keeping up. But 2022, I know, was a year that 64 Analytics talked about a lot. Like there were several teams that year inside the top 16 of the RPI that ended up not hosting. And there was a lot of teams that were like, what the crap happened? Like, why did the committee not go with us here? I think if your job is to project who's going to make the tournament, you do have to consider those factors. Like, okay, if the committee chooses to throw a curveball at us, what might it be? And I that's where I think it came down to is they were trying to look, is there a team that's not going to, that we think has a hosting profile that the committee may go against? And that's where I think they landed on State. And I don't think they landed on State because they knew, well, that's the fan base that will react the most. I think they landed on State because of the team that they were looking at making a case for hosting, which was Arkansas. Because Arkansas obviously had the head-to-head series win over Mississippi State. Arkansas had the most quad one wins in the country. And Arkansas was playing really good baseball down the stretch. And I know the SEC tournament, whether or not that matters, a lot of people are just, it doesn't matter. But the committee does evaluate. The last 15 games is one of their criteria that they look at. And even prior to going to Hoover, Arkansas was playing really good baseball down the stretch. And we're playing about as well as anybody in the SEC, not named Georgia, clearly with Georgia taking it to them in the championship game. So I think it was one of those deals where they're like, this Arkansas team has a good case to host. If they're going to host, who's not hosting? And that's where I think people like Mississippi State was an easy answer there because, well, they beat Mississippi State head to head. We'll take them out. Also, the other side to it, I think it's a lot easier to be like, we'll swap an SEC team for another when I think the committee has shown they want to be able to spread out host conferences as much as possible. And that's where people talking about like, which, Oregon, which they got an 11 seed, which was kind of crazy, but like, West Virginia, Nebraska, these teams that were coming under scrutiny from a lot of people, like, why is that a host resume over Mississippi State? Probably shouldn't be, but I think the committee looks at those teams and it's like, well, we can't have everybody be in the SEC. That's why I think State was the team that was being singled out. I don't think it was all a conspiracy like we're trying to be anti-Mississippi State here. I think it was more just trying to I think there's some level of convince yourselves, is the committee going to do something here? And they probably overthought it because the committee didn't. The committee went by the RPI. The committee took into account that Arkansas lost as many bad games as they did, which does matter. And there was some overthinking to it more than anything else. I don't think it was about getting people riled up. I think it was more overthinking and trying to you start thinking so hard, is the committee going to throw a curveball at you that you convince yourself that's what's going to happen? State's resume was there to host, though. And it would have been a massive break from the precedent for a team that, again, everything I mentioned, 40 wins, 18 wins against the conference, and having a top 10 strength of schedule, having a top 16 RPI, no bad losses. That is a team that hosts. Is the lack of series wins over top teams a knock? For sure. But I went back and I was curious. I looked through. There have been years where you've had SEC teams that only finished with one series win against actual quality competition. I didn't look at it from did you beat a bunch of teams that ended up being tournament teams? But there's a year that Arkansas only had one series. There was a year Arkansas did not have a single series win over a top 20 RPI team. They didn't play a lot of them that year. But there was a year that Arkansas ended up, again, they did not win a series. This was a couple years back. Did not win a series against a top 20 RPI team. And, they faced a few of them on the schedule. They were still a national seed. Because the RPI had them in the top 10, the strength of schedule was still top 10. But you go back, I think that 2022 year, there you had a few teams that either only had one or I think it was you had a few that only had one series win against a top 20 RPI team. The Florida, I think it's Florida that year, their profile is very similar to Mississippi State with where they landed both in RPI, strength of schedule, the overall record, very closely aligned, where Florida that year, the only notable team they beat was they took a series from Miami, and then they had a couple good wins against Florida State in the midweeks. You can kind of compare that to Mississippi State this year, where it was really just they and also Florida State, I don't even think was a host that year. I could be wrong. Miami was up there in the RPI, though. They had a series win against Miami, and then Florida State was a decent win. They didn't do anything in conference play. And you can kind of compare that to Mississippi State, like it was really just Ole Miss for MSU. But that Florida team hosted. This Mississippi State team hosted. And I know that leads to a bunch of other debates over the SEC, how many bids should they get, how much do the RPI matter. I'll be honest, I do think setting aside, how this benefited Mississippi State this year, putting that much in RPI is probably something that I don't know that I fully agree with. I do think you have to consider all factors there. But clearly the committee values it, and it panned out for Mississippi State. So the Bulldogs end up being a host when it's all said and done. And, again, get the number 14 national seed paired up with, of course, the Athens Regional. If State gets through the Starkville Regional, they will, in all likelihood, be facing the Georgia Bulldogs once again this season. Obviously, it has not gone well for State this year. They are 0-4 against Georgia. A few of those games close. A couple of them not. Obviously State easily could have won that series in Starkville, but ends up getting swept at home and then weren't able to get it done in the SEC tournament. But Georgia kind of just handling business in that one. I say handling business. What was it? 5-3 was the final score. So I guess that was another competitive game, but it just didn't feel that close with the way it played out. I mean, look, to be honest, if you're Mississippi State, there is a level of you got to earn it. And if they're going to make a run to Omaha, having to go through Georgia, it would be fitting that's kind of the monkey off the back that they haven't been able to slay. I would love to see it just because, my God, have Georgia fans been the most obnoxious people. Georgia fans are entering Tennessee fan territory. We're this program that generally couldn't care less about this sport. And obviously Georgia's had a lot more success in baseball historically than Tennessee has. I know Tennessee under Vitello became a different animal, but traditionally Georgia had won a lot more, and I think had a national title already. They'd done more in baseball maybe than Tennessee had. But Georgia fans, if it's not football, they really do not care. And I know they were bothered by they got upset because everybody was picking State to win that series against them. They got upset because of the number of State fans that were yelling about the RPI at them, which I know the RPI ends up mattering a lot when it comes to hosting, but by God, guys, the RPI talk with Georgia fans, y'all did go overboard there. But because of that, now Georgia fans, like any chance they get to take a shot at Mississippi State, they're doing it this year. And it looks like they're going to get another opportunity. I would love for State to be able to silence them and end that conversation, but it's going to be a tall task. That would require Mississippi State doing something they haven't done all year, which is put together a full, great weekend against a very, very good team. And Georgia's obviously one of the best teams in the country. Obviously, to do that, though, you got to get through the Starkville Regional first, which is going to be its own challenge. This is a pretty tough regional draw. I think it was like the fourth or fifth in terms of the average RPI amongst your opponents. Again, with Mississippi State, Cincinnati, Louisiana, Lafayette, and then Lipscomb. The Bison, kind of are what they are, but Cincinnati and ULL are both good teams. This is a Cincinnati team that on the season, 37-20. They were 17-13 in the Big 12. Had a non-conference win, an 8-0 shutout over Auburn. In conference play, they took a series from West Virginia, who obviously ends up being a host team. Don't have a ton of great wins on the season overall. But let's see, where were they actually at in the RPI? Number 22 in the RPI. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good team. And, a Cincinnati team that you look at their numbers, and we'll dive more deeply into this as we get the Thursday show will be more of a regional preview episode is kind of what we'll do. It's sort of the plan for now. But Cincinnati just kind of both at the plate and on the mound, just an all-around solid team. There's nothing that they do dominant. Now they are a big-time base stealing team, which is going to be something for State to have to deal with. You hope you can have Kevin Maluski back there behind home plate. I know you didn't have him in the SEC tournament to be able to kind of deal with that a little bit better. But, They're solid on the mound, solid at the plate. Got a bunch of players who are all Big 12 selections. Had the the Big 12 Freshman of the Year. That's a talented team. And then obviously you talk about ULL. This is another team that is just really solid. 39-23 overall. They're 16-14 in the Sun Belt, but it's the Sun Belt's a big challenge. They've played really good baseball down the stretch. Number 33 in the RPI. But look, they got a series win over Southern Miss. They got a series win over Coastal. So the two best teams in their league, they took series from them. Did lose the series to Troy, but it was a very competitive back and forth series in that league. And I'm trying to see how many series did they win to close out the season here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 straight series victories to end the regular season. And again, Coastal was a part of that. It was kind of the one really good team. Arkansas State, pretty solid in terms of the RPI, and they took the series there. So, I mean, this is a good team. Now, when you look at Louisiana, more pitching first. They're not a great team at the plate. Another team that likes to steal a lot of bases. They play a little bit more small ball. They will walk at a high rate, trying to get on. It's more about getting guys on base, put them into scoring position, stealing bases, and then hopefully try to bring them in on singles. Not a lot of hidden for power or any of that. But pitching, they had a couple selections to the second team All Sun Belt team from their starting pitching group. They're not a dominant pitching staff, but they're pretty good on that end as well. So, look, that's another good team. This is not an easy regional to get through. It's two quality teams that State's going to have to play well. I think when we've seen State play teams of this level this year, overall, they've handled their business and they've shown up. And I trust them to be able to do it. I think it'll be a crazy atmosphere due to Noble Field, given that you're getting postseason baseball there for the first time in 5 years. But it's not going to be a cakewalk. State's going to have to go out and play well. And I think if you're a Bulldog fan, you need to see them go out and handle these series. And if you're going to have that type of confidence moving forward that this team is going to be able to make a real run in the postseason, you need them to have a good weekend. You don't want them to sort of slide through this one. So, it's not going to be an easy regional, but it's certainly not the toughest. You saw some other teams that got some more difficult draws out there. Obviously, with some of the 2 seeds that are out there. We talk about Wake Forest, Arkansas, Ole Miss. Some more challenging draws out there for sure. But if you're Mississippi State, you're going to have to play really well to make sure that you handle your business here and then set up a super regional opportunity. But you're hosting. You were able to do enough to host. You've given yourself an opportunity. I think before the year, if you told everybody this team would have 40 wins and be a host team, you would take it. I know that even I have talked about it a little bit. It's a little different when you see some of the games play out that you haven't necessarily have had it be as clean as you would like it to be, and you haven't seen the dominance you would like and the competitiveness against best teams. Or competitiveness is not the right word because they've been competitive. It's the willpower to be able to break through and win those games against top teams. That's something they still haven't displayed. But look, it feels like Ryan McPherson's back, fully ready to go. I know O'Connor said that he had like a 5-inning, 80-pitch outing where he was really outstanding in a scrimmage recently. Ace Reese and Noah Sullivan are both batting really well right now. So I feel like you're getting back to a point where this team could put it together and hopefully make a little bit of a run. But they're going to have to play their best baseball to give themselves an opportunity. At the very least, you got postseason baseball back in Starkville, which is something that we all would have signed up for back at the beginning of the year. So we'll talk more about that series later in the week, or more about the regional later in the week, kind of have a little bit of a deeper look at those opponents that they'll have.